Okay, we will do this one in English. First of all, thank you very much, ESYS Foundation, for inviting us to this panel, and thank you to both Jakub and Graham for being here. You guys have had to travel, and really appreciate the effort. We're going to be talking about how to anticipate hybrid threats, how we need to improve the private-public collaboration. You hear about the impressive backgrounds of both Graham and Jakub, so I will not expand anymore. The purpose for this 45 minutes basically is to explore 4 things. So first is what are hybrid threats, clarify that they're not new. We will talk a little bit about the historical background of hybrid threats, but why they are becoming very important in terms of both the growing complexity and impact in our societies, in our companies, in our public organizations. We will discuss also how prepared the EU institutions and the corporates are for this type of new threats, how the threat landscape is evolving and why, and also what can be done about it. Well, I want part of the panel to be very operational in terms of what are the concrete actions that you as experts will advise public officials, public organizations, but also corporates to take in order to mitigate the impact, anticipate this type of hybrid threats. I would like the audience to be interactive, so I will be asking some questions, and I will ask you guys to do a little bit of exercise by raising your hands. I saw that a lot of you were eating croissants at the break, so it's an opportunity to burn some calories. I'm going to start with you, actually asking you to raise your hand if you think that we are at war. So whoever thinks that we are at war, please raise your hand. Okay? So I think less than 50%. Would you agree that is less than 50%?
Looks like it.
Good. So let's start with defining hybrid threats. Graham, I will start with you. Can you give us a short description, a short introduction to what hybrid threats are?
Yeah, well, actually, I'll go back to your first question, is that I don't think we are at war, not the legal definition of war, but we are at a position of contest. And that's daily, it's attritional, it's continuing, and it's increasing. What are those threats? It's subversion, it's coercion, it's sabotage. And I think what makes this, and the reason why I don't like the use of the term hybrid war or grey zone war, and why we should be thinking it as a form of conflict, is that the use of the term war makes you think it's a military task. And indeed, those things which are being targeted are parts of our state. Actually, that's not the case. The responses to this are sub-war threshold. That's the whole point of hybrid contest or grey zone war. It's about attacking the parts of somebody's society that undermines them from within, which is why all of you here, apart from those from the Spanish government, are part of the new front line. That's where I think we are today.
Thank you. My work will not be very hard because I will be asking the same question to both of you. So, Jakub, please go ahead.
Yeah, I actually made a few notes just to cite the Center's definition properly, but then I will give a more concise, more pop definition. But the way the Center of Excellence talks about it, hybrid threat is a coordinated action that combines military and non-military, overt and covert means to target a state or an institution's vulnerabilities. And these threats are undermining the target by exploiting thresholds of detection, so as Graham was talking about, and attribution. And they often involve a mix of disinformation, cyber attacks, economic pressure, etc., etc. There are some 15, 17 domains of various hybrid threats, so the hybrid attackers usually combine several of these domains in one. I think the pop definition would be whatever is between war and peace, so precisely not crossing the boundary to full-scale war. But it is definitely not a peaceful activity. If we have a look at the biggest aggressor in Europe nowadays, which is head and shoulders above everybody else, Russia, arsons, blowing up ammunition depots, jamming of airplane signals, violating airspace, violating borders on a daily basis. Drones, fueling migration crisis to cause further problems in our societies. All this supporting of the extremists, separatists, xenophobes, racists of all kind. These are fairly hostile activities, but we still do not call them full-scale war. So maybe the answer should be twofold. Yes, Russia thinks we are at war and they behave accordingly. No, we do not think we are at war and we behave accordingly.
So I like this last point very much, because I guess that I was just playing with the audience and with all of us, because I don't think that we are the ones that decide if we are at war or not. It is somebody else. And legal definitions probably do not matter in terms of defining if we are at war or we are not at war. Just before we move on to how we prepare, or how well or bad prepare we are, quick question on why hybrid threats? I mean, what is the intent of the hostile powers, of the criminal actor, to weaponize the internet, to weaponize diplomatic domains, to weaponize the economy? What is the intent that they pursue?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one, and I know there are some ex-military people in the audience and some reservists in the audience from the Spanish military. If you're in the Western military, you go to a defense academy in school, you're learning about Clausewitz, which I assume that most people have probably heard the name, and it's a way of thinking. It's a linearity of view. It's peace, war. It's a bit like Article 5. Article 5, when Article 5 is triggered, we have collective defense. It's linear. Unfortunately, many of our adversaries, and hybrid isn't, and grey zone isn't just a Russian phenomenon, other people too. Iranians employ it quite significantly, as indeed do the Chinese. I think we need to go back actually to somebody more like Sun Tzu. You know, Sun Tzu, I'll paraphrase one of his expressions. You know, the highest form of warfare is to defeat your enemy before the war has commenced. And that's, I think, really what we're seeing today. It is the ability to undermine our democracies and our structures through those things which are the most significant, which is the way that we live, which is largely through commercial entities. That's what we're seeing is being undermined. Why now? Well, I think what we're seeing, the increase in hybrid warfare, I mean, there's no doubt about it. The 12 minutes of 3 MiG-31s crossing Estonia, traversing through, the drones flying over Schleswig-Holstein, the 10th of September, drones flying into Poland, and all of that is no longer going from the covert and subtle, but the more aggressive forms. Why are we seeing it? I think there's 3 principal reasons why we're seeing it. The first one is to drive a wedge within Europe. It's to fracture our societies from within, to make us think that a united Europe, who would think a Brit would be saying this, that a united Europe is not a good thing. It is a good thing, and we must persevere and pursue. And I disagree with the earlier commentator. I think actually the UK is heavily engaged in European security and will continue to be. Politically, we may be slightly adjunct from that. So the first one is divide that wedge into Europe. The second one is a distraction from a failing summer campaign by Vladimir Putin in Ukraine. The summer offensive did not work. That does not mean the Ukrainians are winning by any stretch of the imagination. But the third one is an older, more historical one, and that is Vladimir Putin and Russia dislikes liberal democracies, and wealthy liberal democracies, which largely the West is. Our governments may not think they're wealthy, but we are comparatively. And what we have is a society of free speech, where we can vote, where we can choose who leads us. And that is not a comfortable space to be for an oligarch like Vladimir Putin. That's why we're seeing the increase. And the other reason we're seeing the increase is the sheer ease. It's suddenly cheaper. It's easier than it has been for years to achieve significant effect for very little exposure or potential damage.
Thank you. Jakub, you and I have been talking a lot about the scope of the Center of Excellence of Hybrid Threats in Helsinki, which is a joint center between NATO and the External Action Service, the EU, right? And you know, I've suggested that it would be great to also add to the corporates to the center. You are very much focused on the public on the public domain. I would love if you illustrate us a little bit with what is the purpose of the center, and also what is the role that you think, or what is the kind of role that corporates play in hybrid threats as victims, mostly. I'm trying to persuade you to expand the scope of the center to include corporates too.
I'm afraid it's not exactly up to me, but yeah, no, the center truly started in 2017, if I'm not mistaken, before the time I joined, based on an agreement reached between Jens Stoltenberg and Federica Mogherini, so between General Secretary of NATO and the Foreign Minister of the EU. But our main clients are actually the participating states. So it's the capitals whom we talk most often to. So it's the participating states, both the member states of the EU and the allied members of NATO. So currently we have 36 participating states, plus 2 organizations, EU and NATO. The purpose is to help our participating states and organizations to understand the hybrid threats better and react to them better. So we are not exactly operational. If you are looking for somebody who would be monitoring the number of drones that flew into the Polish airspace, this is actually not us. For that information, go to Warsaw. We are acting on a bit more strategic level, so we can tell them, these are the various countermeasures that work, this is what various countries have tried, this is what works, this is what doesn't work, which not always is the same lesson learned easily transferable to a completely different country with a different legal and institutional environment. So how are we trying to do that? We publish reports, we organize events, workshops, conferences, and we run trainings. I'm responsible for the disinformation file, so we were publishing reports, for example, on the best practices from Ukraine, how Ukraine counters Russian disinformation as a country that has the most experience with this problem. Because we saw that many of our civil servants are struggling with measuring the impact of disinformation operations. We commissioned a report on how to estimate the impact of information operations. And similarly, because we saw that they are struggling with having their communication a bit more creative, we commissioned a report how humor can help you to fight against propaganda and disinformation, which proved to be very popular from what we heard, and some civil servants were showing it to their superiors. You see, even the hybrid COE says we should be more out there. We should be more engaging with the audience. So this is how we are trying to help them do their job when it comes to the report. With the events, conferences, I actually see Fernando there from the MFA. He participated in the recent workshop for counter-disinformation practitioners. We are trying to connect the people from all our countries, again, plus Ukraine, as the country that has the most experience, despite the fact that Ukraine is not a participating state of the center. And we are trying to have them exchange best practices, what works, what doesn't work. And with the trainings, we are actually traveling to the capital, and we train 20, 30, 40 people in one country.
Public officials, mostly.
Civil servants. We work mainly for the governments. We are financed by the governments. So how to engage the private business? I would very much love to see that happen, but again, as I said, this is not exactly on us. This is something that the private business should persuade their governments about. But one of the problems we are facing, and here I'm speaking purely for the information domain, one of the problems we are facing is that we are heavily outnumbered by the bad actors. You know, many people dismiss Russia as a very weak economy. And in a certain sense, they are right. I mean, it's an economy probably the size of Italy, so certainly no match for the whole Western Bloc. The trouble is, they don't need to pay pensions. They don't care about their health of their population. They don't pay the education. Have a look at the budgets of the Russian Federation. Every year, they are cutting the health expenses. They are cutting the education expenses. There are 2 items that always get more money: the army and the propaganda. This is the 2 items they spend on, and this is the 2 items that they heavily outspend us in. So again, the collective Europe still doesn't produce as much ammunition as the Russian Federation. How come that this laughable economy outperforms us in this critical dimension? And similarly, in the information domain, very conservative estimates speak about Russia spending $2 billion on their propaganda operations annually. They are very conservative estimates. They are basically just counting the Russia's wide sources. The Russia Todays, the Sputniks, they are not counting the famous troll factory in St. Petersburg, IRA. They are not counting the social design agency, which was recently uncovered by many Western journalists and researchers. They do not. This doesn't cover what Russia is paying to the influencers, to the various groups that are supporting their objectives, the fighters for traditional family, the various separatists in Europe that are very frequently parroting Russian lies to take. So
and your best guess in that sense is that
so I think we are talking
north of 3-4 billion.
I wouldn't be surprised if it was more like 6 to 8. I wouldn't
6 to 8 billion.
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, again, a very big part of the Russian state budget is secretive. This is another part that always gets higher amount of money. Anyway, and if I compare it to what we are spending, as you know, this is how we met. I was in the European External Action Service, responsible for the first EU's response to counter Russian disinformation campaigns. So in the first year, can you guess what our budget was? I mean, it's not difficult to remember. It was 0.
Very good.
In the second year, it was 0. In the third year, it was 0. In the fourth year, we got the first million euros. So after 3 years, we got to a ratio 1 to 2,000 compared to the Russians. I mean, with this difference in resources, they do not even need to be that smart or that inventive. They are just beating us with the sheer numbers. If we want to overcome the threat, it probably has to be the private business that will come to the rescue, because from what I notice around Europe, it's not like the governments have an abundance of resources. Usually we see rather cuts in the civil service. So it probably has to be the private business. And ideally supporting, obviously not just the governmental efforts, but ideally the civil society, because they are really in the front line. They are the first ones who will do a lot of uncovering investigations, who will be the first ones ringing the alarm bell. We saw it in Ukraine, we saw it in many European countries, that the civil society might be the first one to actually notice that there is something wrong. But unfortunately, very often they lack the finances, even more so after the Donald Trump administration pulled the plug on the financing of the civil society.
Thank you. Hybrid threats, I mean, for the audience, hybrid threats are not something new. The concept, we were talking, I think, briefly about that when we were preparing, it goes back to 2006. General Mattis and Hoffman, when they started talking about hybrid threats within the Western context, but it connects with irrestricted warfare of the Chinese, with reflective action of the Russian doctrine. So, Graham, you have a lot of experience on the ground, given your military work. We have Jakub here, who is, a huge, it's a top expert on the cognitive domain, information domain, cognitive domain, the ability to manipulate at a scale societies and decision makers. How your two worlds connect, these 17 domains that are defined by the Hybrid Center, is it a continuum? Do they play the bad actors, the hostile powers, simultaneously on the 17 domains? How does it work on the ground?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So there is a danger, particularly military academics like to have everything in nice, neat, clean boxes. And that's not always the way it should be. The Americans, they look at the Western view of hybrid. They see hybrid as, they use the definition of the word. It's the mixture of various bits to achieve an effect. I think in the West, in Europe, we use hybrid in a different way, which is it's not necessarily a blending of hard-edged military at the same time as coercion and subversion. We see it more of, and I think this is more appropriate to us, it's the ability to undermine our established, not only our systems, but also the confidence within our populations. That's really what they want to try and get to, which really falls straight into, which is why Jakub's work is so important. We've got to shore that up. In terms of effects on the grounds, I would just, for all of you thinking we're all doomed, it's all going to go horribly wrong. Let's be very clear what Ukraine has done. It's superior in terms of numbers, in terms of firepower, in terms of technology, and in terms of losing the initiative in the early days. Ukraine should not be fighting 4 years later, but they are. And the reason for that is part of fighting a war is the mental attitude in which we come to it. And one of the advantages that we have in the West, which is what I think grey zone activity is looking to undermine, is our will to win, is a belief in our systems and our structures. It is the people, it is us, it's the people in the military who choose to be in the military who are defending our ways of life. Now, put it on in a different sphere. When I was in the military, what I was looking to do was the opposite, which is to exploit the critical vulnerabilities of my opponent in whichever way they are. If we spin that into where we find ourselves in this grey zone conflict, we've got to protect our vulnerabilities, and that is our dialogue, our discourse, our belief in democracy, and we need to shore up those systems. But we also need to recognize that I think our opponents look at our commercial structures as being part of the state, because in many of those countries, senior or significant commercial entities are run either directly or indirectly by the state. And that's the view. So large organizations, take Telefonica as an example, as we're sitting in this building, would be seen as a state entity. Over here, we delineate, and I think it's difficult for us in the commercial world to realize that we are under threat and we need to put the measures in place. And that is what, so as somebody on the ground, you're looking at the vulnerability to exploit, and that is what's being exploited. And that's why one of the reasons we're seeing an explosion of grey zone activity, because it undermines the very part of who we are.
So I think we touch on the second point of this panel, which is how well prepared we are. So on one side, we have your view that just in the cognitive space, the Russians are investing between, let's say, 3, 4 to 6, 8 billion on a yearly basis. And on the other side, we have the corporates that are seen as part of the states that they want to, let's say, erode. So overall, the picture is that we are not very well prepared. This is what I'm getting from both of you. But I would love to talk about Jakub's socks, Ukraine. That's a quite powerful statement. And so where were the signals in Ukraine that we didn't see coming? I'm thinking about Crimea, but I would love to, before we move on to the next, talk a bit more about Ukraine, where we are learning about hybrid threats from the battlefield there, and what have we been missing from what was happening and what is happening there?
Well, I mean, Crimea, you could use it's quite a nice little case study if you take your minds back all the way back to the mid 2000s. First of all, you saw the exploitation of the legal status. Who does Crimea truly own to? And you saw lots of narrative being pushed out globally, suggesting that actually Crimea had never been part of a Ukraine. I mean, you could define what is Ukraine and what is Russia, but that was the first thing we saw. Then we saw a very sophisticated psychological and information operations campaign that was launched. Do you remember the Little Green Men piece, which was talked about in the press? So already it was undermining the sort of status as to that entity being controlled by the legal entity at the time, which is the Ukrainian government. All of those are sort of precursors, which you start looking forward to where we are now. And this is the days before bot farms. This is before the days of a prevalence of information warfare as we see it today with social media. Look to where we are now. Look at some of the messages running through our own societies. Whether you're in Spain and whether you're in the UK, you see the same issues of nationalism, popularism, all those wedges that not only break up Europe, I'd argue they also try to break our sovereignty and the individual countries. All of that, you could argue, is part of the precursor of what we're seeing with hybrid.
Thank you. Jakub, any comments on that? I mean, the first time you and I met, you saw all the things that we are seeing now, you saw them coming, right? And you were referring in our first conversation, I recall very well, to Ukraine, to what had happened, to what was happening there. But if you can expand a little bit.
Well, I do think that if I predicted anything, I actually learned it in Ukraine. This is where you learned the most about countering Russian hybrid activities, including disinformation or information aggression. But I think if you would speak to Ukrainians, I mean, we had the last visit in the center just before I went before I went to Madrid, and they themselves were saying, you know, we did miss a lot of signals. 2007 Estonia, it was just a few weeks after Vladimir Putin gave the famous speech in the Munich Security Conference, and yeah, he delivered very quickly. That was probably the first hybrid incident. Estonians moved a statue of a Soviet soldier, which they perceived as a symbol of victory over fascism. Estonians, in whose country this was happening, perceived this obviously very differently. They saw it just as a symbol of moving from one dictatorship to the other dictatorship, because that's what it was for them. So they moved it to the outskirts, from the city center to the outskirts. And Russians launched a brutal hybrid attack, cyber attacks against the state institutions, against the banks, so against private sector as well. They do not really distinguish between hitting the public sector or the private sector. For them, it's the country that they are targeting. They were instigating protests, instigating violence in Tallinn. They were encouraging violent protests in front of the Estonian embassy in Moscow. So the Estonian ambassador had a hard time to get out of the office. So there was a lot that was happening already back in 2007. 2008, Georgia, again something that was happening not just in the public domain, but it was accompanied by cyber attacks against private companies, against mobile providers, because they were trying to cut the communication channels. So these were some of the signals that even Ukrainians would tell you, you know, maybe we missed this. I used to have a great friend in Ukraine. He was from the occupied territories, from Luhansk. In 2014, he had to escape because he was on the Russian hit list, and in 2017, he was unfortunately killed. However, he was telling me how he was trying to warn Kiev already back in 2012. Something is brewing up here. They are actually building up the protest potential. You know, they are amplifying these narratives that Donbas is basically just Russia, and nobody was listening to him. And that's Ukraine, a country that nowadays is actually the most alert and probably sees these signals the first. So I think it's not just them. We also have a tendency to sort of miss the wake-up calls. I've been working on this topic just for 10 years, and I've already seen so many wake-up calls. 2014, Crimea. 2016, Brexit referendum and US elections. 2017, French presidential elections, where Russians heavily supported Marine Le Pen and attacked Emmanuel Macron. Same year, elections into the Bundestag, attacking Angela Merkel, supporting Alternative für Deutschland. If I'm not mistaken, that was the year of the referendum here in Spain, which is the incident how we got to know each other.
Illegal referendum.
Illegal referendum, thank you for pointing out, thank you. So Russians were heavily supporting that as well. Wake-up calls through COVID-19, when Ursula von der Leyen finally said that disinformation can kill, which is something, again, that we already saw earlier in the East, but suddenly also the rest of Europe saw it. 2022, another wake-up call, and it feels like we are constantly hitting the snooze button on these wake-up calls. I'm not really sure that we've already woken up. So it's difficult. It feels like we are missing a lot of these very, very clear signals that something is going wrong.
So the signals are there. It seems to me that it is a question of being more sensitive to, or being more aware to those signals, understanding the context in a better way. What would you advise? And now you are in a different position. You are working on a private company, advising companies on how to read the signals early on in order to anticipate and mitigate this type of risk. But what will be the key advice for this audience, especially for those working in the corporate space, about how to improve that?
Yeah, okay. I'll just widen that slightly, if I may, to say that first of all, this is a blend between corporate and government, and the two need to be together. And the reason for that is the threats that we're starting to see that are becoming more and more obvious. We've got the defender's dilemma, really, is that if we ignore an act of hybrid warfare, hybrid conflict or grey zone activity, if we ignore it, then we end up encouraging it. If we respond, then potentially we may lead to escalate. But let's not forget what our aggressors and our opponents are trying to do. They're also as well in sending in malign messages into our societies. They also want to overly emphasize their strength. So they want to make you think, or Russia wants to make you think that they are invulnerable, incredibly superior, and we're very close to tripping a line that will lead to conflict. We had the announcement only this week of some new hypersonic weapon allegedly that's been flown. Again, to give the impression to the Western audience that actually we must not be prodding against Russian aggression. Actually, the opposite is true. What we should be doing, both from a commercial perspective, aligned with our governments, is that if we see an act against us, if you see whether it's a cyber attack, whether it's a case of arson, or worst case scenario, as Rheinmetall find out, a potential assassination attempt, we must be very, very clear and quick. First of all, you as a commercial entity, and then the government's backing it up, is actually announcing it and calling what it is. At the moment, it takes us days, weeks. Even in the UK, our security services spend weeks before they're prepared to say there's an act of aggression, either by Russia or by China. We've got to be quicker in calling it out. We've got to reduce the area where the grey zone can operate and can be effective. So that's the first one, is expose. The second one, all of us, whether you're a government or a commercial entity, you've now got to start looking seriously about resilience. It's tedious business, having backups, having reserves. It's tedious and it's costly, but it does mean that you will persevere should you come under a form of attack, be that digital or indeed physical. And thirdly, I think we need something at a European level where we can almost declare the ability to have a safe area where you can declare these incidents, so that Europe as a whole, whether that's through NATO or through an EU security structure, can actually identify, so we don't have an individual act of aggression that seems localized and we just move on from it. We actually identify how large this whole picture can be. The disadvantage, of course, is that if you start to announce that you've been hacked or you have some form of aggression against you, commercially it can be seen to be sensitive and can weaken you. So we need that safe space without it being legally damaging, where companies can actually declare that. What does that give us? That gives us a true picture of the level of threat facing us. It raises awareness in terms of resilience and how we should respond to it. And it also emboldens our politicians to be slightly firmer and harder, both in terms of messaging to our own populations that we are in control of the situation, and also internationally, diplomatically, being harder against those who try and oppress us.
Thank you, Graham.
Just to finish
Yes, of
with
course.
this. Fantastic point about this. If we don't react, it might get worse, and if we do react, it might get worse. The Russians are actively working with this. They are designing it. They are openly saying it. So in the, I think, 4 or 5 month old report called Beyond Doppelganger on the Social Design Agency, one of the most active Russian troll factories nowadays, James Pament and Darejan Tsurtsumia went through the gigabytes of leaked documents from this social design agency, including how this is organized in the meetings in the Kremlin. And one of the points they were specifically pointing out there, that they are trying to create a lose-lose situation in the information domain. If you do not react to the disinformation campaign, you are allowing it to spread. You are allowing it to influence more and more people. The problem is already grown. If you do react, immediately they will start accusing you of violating the freedom of speech. And so creating these lose-lose situations, this is really a specialty. And this spreading fear, if you react against what we are doing, something worse will come. Nuclear deterrence, 1956 invasion of Hungary. Just last week was the anniversary of the revolution in Hungary. When the West contemplated we could help the Hungarians against the Soviet aggression, Soviets immediately ran with the narrative, if you do this, there will be nuclear war. 1968, my country, Czechoslovakia, exactly the same. If you help the victims of our aggression, there will be nuclear war. 1979, Afghanistan, the same. 2014, Crimea. 2022, the rest of Ukraine. Every time they invade a country, they threaten, if you do something about it, there will be nuclear war. There hasn't been a nuclear war yet.
Hearing you, hearing both of you, I started remembering how we first met. We met when we also started detecting some of these signals happening in the south of Europe through type of cognitive warfare. So let's talk a bit about the south border. I have the impression, my very personal impression, that when you guys talk, you're talking about Poland, you're talking about the Baltics, you're talking about the north border. I have the impression that in the south border there is this perception of distance to war or hybrid war. So if we will spend a little bit of time about the south border, and in particular, one of the key domains that is being exploited very successfully and where Russia plays a very important role is in migration flows, immigration as a weaponizable domain. So could we expand a little bit about that, about what hybrid threats mean for the south border, and to which point they're different or not from what we are seeing in the north border?
Yeah, well, look, you raise a very, very valid point. And I'd even say that if you're in the United Kingdom, the reality that we are at war, in reality, we are, if we're not at war, we are conducting warlike acts. We are putting British missiles across the border into Russia based on British intelligence. We're not saying we're at war with Russia. That's pretty close to a warlike act. And yet, if you were to read a British newspaper or watch a British television, it's the same news. It's health, schooling, fantasy Love Island, or whatever it may be. It's not the reality of the world in which we are actually operating in today. And it's the same for you, it's the same for our commercial companies. We are operating in no longer a safe space in order to just conduct commerce. Both our populations and all our activities of our state are effectively being threatened. The difference is, diplomatically, politically, at the moment, it's not the thing to be seen to be done to be talking about the increased threat. If you were to go on a short flight across to Helsinki, or indeed to the Baltic states, or to Scandinavia, or even to places like Denmark, there is no doubt they are talking about the defense of Europe. I was shocked to be in a dinner which was held in London, but it was all Danes that were in it. And at the end of it, they looked to me and said, well, how is the UK going to help us in Europe drive Europe forward? And I was shocked that, that first of all, you're looking at the UK that has largely been disengaged from Europe for far too long. And secondly, even in our own country, I'm not sure we really understand the levels of threat that we're in. Come even further south, well, of course, you're not feeling that threat on a day-to-day basis, but you are seeing the causes of it. As I walked up from the hotel today, there was a whole line of migrants who were going through piles of clothing to try and find clothing. Now, that's just not here in Madrid and here Spain. That's a picture throughout Europe, both north and south. You are closer to some of those areas of instability. And whether that instability has been actually inspired by hostile states, or whether it's being exploited by hostile states, it's still a line of weakness. It's a seam in our society that will be exploited by our aggressors. You may not feel the dragon's breath of Russia today, just as we in the UK don't feel it. But there's no doubt that Russia has been more hostile than it's been for the last 30 odd years.
Thank you. Jakub, what are your views on the south border? Should we relax or not? Or?
No, definitely not. No, I think you mentioned one point yourself, and it was, again, I believe in one of the Russian opposition press, one of the explanations for the Russian war in Syria was to actually aggravate the migration crisis and cause more problems for Europe. I can't say if it's true or not, but that sounds actually like a very plausible explanation given what we know about how Moscow behaves. But if I stick to the information domain, I remember from some conversations with colleagues in France how they were significantly concerned about the Russian operations in Africa, in countries where France used to have maybe a little bit more positive image, and suddenly the image is very negative, and it's very difficult for them to do diplomacy or do business indeed there if they face a very hostile population. I heard something similar from colleagues from the Belgian government, how they are concerned about the Russian operations in this region as well, because the population gets radicalized, and then they radicalize their relatives who emigrated, for example, to Brussels. So suddenly you have to deal with a community that was radicalized on a messaging that is in a different country, but because there are family ties, they consume the same information space. Perhaps you could tell me how the Russian operations in Latin America, where from what I read, RT is quite a big one, how can this affect the communities of various Latin American nations here in Spain. I presume the mechanism will be exactly the same.
And the US, 15% of the population.
We see it in the States as well.
Yeah.
So I think this has potential to spill over to other audiences. And I think it also affects the business. I mean, how are you going to do business with somebody who hates you? Like if you are described for years as the evil oppressor whose talk about democracy is just a false flag operation in order to exploit you some more, as they have been doing for the last centuries, how are you going to do business with them? So I think it affects not just the information domain, but also economy.
Thank you. Being conscious of time, we have five minutes left. If you were to change only one thing in the public sector or in the corporate sector, especially in critical infrastructure, what will that be?
I'm going to be cheeky and give you two things. So first of all, in the commercial sector, I've got two messages. In the commercial sector, no matter who you are, no matter how big or small you are, whether you're the dental practice that somebody mentioned earlier, hypothetically, or whether you're running Telefonica, are you actually doing desktop war gaming, for use of a term, to actually see how you will react if you're hacked, if you have acts of sabotage, arson, or misinformation spread against you? If you're not doing that twice a year, then I suggest that you should be. And secondly, my message would be to governments, all our governments nationally, which is that change the narrative, provide the opportunity to quickly out and put into the daylight and sunlight the acts, even the micro acts of aggression that are being acted against us.
And how to improve that public-private commercial cooperation? Let's do those exercises together. Let's try to share more intelligence.
Absolutely. Let's look at a national level, how we would respond if I mean, look, the UK's just had Jaguar Land Rover. It's probably its only remaining, certainly significant car manufacturer. It's been taken off for 2 months at a cost of billions. Is that Jaguar's problem? It is if it's hundreds of thousands. If it's £2 billion, guess whose problem it is? It's a government problem. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Do it together.
Jakub, what are your views on that one? What would be your top recommendations?
I would probably pick up on what Carlos was mentioning during the panel as well, that the level of understanding is really low, the level of understanding that this is a serious threat. And I fear this is the same in the information domain. I think if the understanding of the seriousness of the threat was higher, it would be easier to acquire higher resources for this, which is something that I already identified as a key problem. But I think it would be also easier to discuss some more robust measures, like punitive measures or offensive operations in the aggressor's information domain. I don't think they should be taboo, but unfortunately in many Western countries they are taboo. When we did the report in Ukraine, we were interviewing 22 practitioners from the civil service, from the military men, from the media, from the civil society. And all of them were 100% supportive of the punitive measures, shutting down Russian channels, shutting down Russian email providers, shutting down Russian maps, shutting down even the channels that are just spreading Russian propaganda. They were even saying, had we not done this, it would be impossible to defend our country. It would just be impossible. And this is something that even the president of the Ukrainian Pen Club will tell you, academics will tell you that. This is not the level of understanding you have in the West. I think they understand that Russian journalists are not journalists, they are just soldiers with a keyboard. And by the way, they are getting exactly the same medals as military men. Russian journalists are getting medals for participating in a war. They are not getting medals for journalism, not getting medals for reporting. They are getting medals for participating in a war, just like your general. And I think Ukrainians understand that, and I fear that in the rest of Europe, we do not understand it this well. And I think this prohibits us from being a bit more robust in our response.
Will that be that we are still in a peacetime mentality? Is that probably the key issue? Yeah. Changing the narrative requires to be a bit more honest with the public about it?
Well, I think our whole mindset, we despite the fact we think we are short of money in the West, actually we live in a very wealthy, relatively wealthy and also luxurious system where we have the right of free speech and to do largely what we want. Our forebears, our grandparents fought in the war of Europe, for Europe. That memory has gone. And so we are living in in a relatively false time, I think, at the moment.
Thank you, Graham. I think we have a few seconds left for some questions from the audience. Anybody willing to ask? Maybe we bring you the... Okay. If you could say your name and affiliation, please, that would be great.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Laura from Telefónica. Thank you, Mr. Cundy and Mr. Kalenský, for your insights. My question was, if disinformation, as you were explaining, is used in war and reshaping public opinion faster than diplomacy can respond, are we then losing influence, not because of weak policy, but because we fail to fight hostile influence with efficient narrative shaping?
Thank you. Graham, would you like to take it first?
Yeah, first of all, I mean, information operations is a fundamental part of warfare, but it works on two sides. First of all, is one against your aggressor, how you're influencing their mindset, but also it's internally on ourselves. So what I would say is that we can't always fight the Russian messages coming out, but we can promote ourselves internally. We can remind ourselves actually what our democracies stand for and actually how great sovereignly and also as part of United Europe our countries are in. So let's at times just remember the positive things we've got. That builds resilience. So when we are facing hard times, as you see with the people of Ukraine, there's an identifying factor which drags you through those difficult times. So there's two sides to it. Yes, our messaging is slow, but also we're not good at actually recognizing the good things about our state.
Jakub?
I think you're right that we need to work better on delivering our message to the target audience. We have to, and this is where we need to improve. However, I don't think this can be the only measure we will rely on. I think it has to be part of the package, but we need to be discussing other measures. If I use a parallel, when you are trying to prolong the lives of your compatriots, you can tell them that they should exercise, that they should eat healthy. But if you don't arrest the mass shooter, you are not prolonging their life very well. We are talking about somebody who uses information as a weapon. They have even military books on this. They are very sophisticated. And we can't be just asking civilians to counter this with the civilian methods. I think we need to be discussing more robust solutions.
Any more questions?
Hi, thank you all for your time and your comments. So we discussed the conditions that I think are descriptive of the asymmetries that we are facing, but I don't think we spoke much about AI and how that's situated in this space in which, which is different from just a few years ago, the scale, speed, precision, segmentation of diverse types of campaigns can be set up at incredibly low cost, and the cross-border problem becomes even more challenging in terms of detection. So I kind of just wanted to touch on the prognosis that you've offered within the context of this seemingly increasingly intractable challenge.
Thank you. I think that's a great point. And AI cuts across every single domain of hybrid threats. But I would love to hear your views.
Well, I mean, I will defer to the experts in a second. But all I will say is that it's just a tool. AI is just a tool. If you go back 10, 15 years, we're all talking about cyber. It's going to revolutionize the world. Now it's AI. It's going to revolutionize the world. It will change things. But fundamentally, it is about whether you're selling a product or whatever you're doing, or it's about human upon human. That is what defines us. In 1907, the electric torpedo was first produced, and apparently we would never have any more navies. We still have them. It changes what we do. The bot farms are significant. The message, the white noise affecting our discourse and our dialogue in the West is significant, but it's not the ultimate.
Graham, would you agree that one of the main, let's say, benefits for the bad guys of AI will be that it lowers the entry barrier? You don't need to have very sophisticated skills to use open source AI, and that, in a way, probably will create more issues in the cognitive space. What are your views on that?
There's no doubt about it. The barriers are being lowered, but also it gives us an opportunity to think what AI now gives you in terms of getting the right message inside some of those closed communities in Russia or China is a good point.
Thank you. Jakub?
Sorry to make the panel so boring, but I will have to agree with Graham again. It is just a tool. It is just a tool. You can use a knife to kill somebody and you can use it to perform a brain surgery. I still remember the time when social media were hailed as a tool for spreading democracy during the Arab Spring. There were not just journalistic articles, but even academic research on this, how social media actually help democracy. Here we are now. AI is a tool which we could be using for good, and we are not doing that. This is on us. The bad actors are using it very well, unfortunately. We see it helps them with the mass production. We see it helps them with lowering the barrier of input. We see it helps them with the micro-targeting. We see it helps them with the language barrier, which they were unable to overcome in some countries. Like in Finland, they were trying to run the campaign, NATO will not save you, and Google Translate somehow messed up safe and safe as. So they were spreading a campaign, NATO will not store you. Not exactly successful. But now when you talk to the colleagues in the Finnish government, they will tell you, well, the AI translation is already getting indistinguishable from a native Finn. It is on us that they are using the tool while we are not. We published a report last month that was mapping the counter-disinformation responses across the Euro-Atlantic region. One of the questions was, do you use AI for detection of disinformation campaigns? And I think out of the 22 respondents, we got 4 yeses.
So we have run out of time. Last question, if there is somebody with a pressing question here. Yes, of course. And we need to finish now.
So 2 super quick comments to add to this wonderful panel. One is about the Russian perspective about this. I think what they are doing is shaping the battlefield, is what is in their doctrine, and that's what they are attacking. And they put the infrastructure in place very much ahead of any kinetic or whatever shock action. Let's remember, for instance, that the 2 entities, the DNR, so the Donetskaya Narodnaya Respublika and the Lugansk one, as organizations were created in 2004 and were activated 10 or 15 years later. So they put this infrastructure in place very much ahead of whatever aggression. And they are doing now that across Europe. And so this is still a lot of work to do in terms of involving law enforcement agencies and so on to bring them to this question, because this is normally conceived as something which is for the intelligence services dealing with a foreign or happening something abroad, but it's happening in-house within our societies. So I think that's my point 1. And the second one, very quickly, and to add to the list that was given by Jakub and to bring the South into the conversation, I think one example that can be considered as the first example of a highly successful hybrid operation at a significant scale, and now we are going to commemorate the 50th anniversary in a couple of weeks, is the Western Sahara annexation by Morocco with the Green March, using civilians or military in plain clothes just to move ahead and to occupy a territory, just dismantling or nullifying the potential response from Spain back then. So that was clearly a nice example of a highly successful hybrid operation playing with all these domains: information, cognitive, manipulating and taking advantage of the political situation in the metropolitan capital, back then Madrid, and taking advantage of the conditions on the ground. So it can be added to the list and then brings the gap of the southern and the eastern flank closer.
So Nico, thank you very much. And with this, we finished. I want to thank both of you, Graham and Jakub, for your contributions. And I hope that we can meet again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.